So Docker, what Docker actually is, right? So just a second. So Docker, why we actually use the Docker? So let's take even a short example. So let's say I'm working in a startup and I have my friend which is working on the same project, and we need to ship the backend to the production server, right? Now if we are not using Docker, or if we are not using the same environment, our app will surely crash, right? So basically, let's say this is my device and this is my friend's device, and this is our production server, right? So this is my PC, this is my friends, and yeah, this is the production server. Now let's say if I'm working on a Python backend, right? So basically this is all Python backend I'm working on. It has all the files, right, that I have created, like dependencies, main.py, app.py, requirements, and all the things, right? Now let's say my device configs is I'm currently using Debian 13, my Python version is 12, and I'm using fast API for backend. So so yeah, so this is my device config, right? Now let's say my friend is using Windows 10, and he has Python version 13, and he has fast API version 1 point, let's say 1.4. let's take this example, right? And we have a production server. It has specs, like it has Ubuntu 1.3, then it has Python version, let's say Python version 13, and it has fast API version 1.3, right? Now I have created Python backend in my PC or my device. Now my friend or my colleague, what he wants to do is that he wants to make some changes in Python backend. So what he'll do is that he'll take this Python backend to his device. He'll install all the dependencies, requirements.txt, and all the things. But the, this backend, as it was running in in the right way or in same way, it will not run in same way as it was running on my device. Why? Because my specs are different, like I'm using Debian 13, Python version 12, and fast API version 1.12, and he is using some different specs like Windows 10, Python 13, fast API 1.4. So the dependencies that I'm using in my Python backend, or the packages that I'm using in in Python backend, it will not work exactly the same way that it should work on my friends, or it should work on my device. It will work differently, or it will give him error. So his time will be wasted in debugging, changing the Python version, creating environment, and all the other things, right? And after that, even if he does this thing and ships the product to the production server, like in his production server, which has entirely different specs, like it has Ubuntu version 1.3, Python 13, and it has Fast API 1.3. So the app is going to crash, right? So in order to solve this problem and in order to end the question that will it work on my machine, Docker was developed. So what Docker actually is, right? So what Docker actually does is that Docker, it basically it creates an isolated environment. It creates an isolated environment called containers, right? And we shift these containers in our server so that it would run and it would be easier than it used to be in pre Docker era, where it was very difficult to like it was really very difficult to run the app exactly in the same way that it's running on my machine. So what Docker actually does is that it creates an, you can say, an isolated environment called containers, right? uh, yeah, it creates an isolated environment called containers. Now, how these containers are formed? So see, basically there are three steps, you can say. So just a second. Yeah, so basically this thing, you can say, this is the Docker file. If you have seen Docker files in different projects, like some project has a Docker file, or like mostly if you are working in startup or company, the product has a Docker file, right? Now the Docker file has all the instructions, like how you need to create an image and all, right? It has all the instructions, or you can say commands. I'll write commands. It has all the commands, right? The Docker file has all the commands, right? Which makes an entire Docker file, right? After that, when we basically push our code in GitHub, it runs all the things, like it has like GitHub Actions that runs this Docker file. It tests that file, it creates the image. When the image is created, and when the containers is formed, which is sent to the production server. So all these things works with the help of GitHub Actions. So you don't need to pay attention on GitHub Actions right now. Just let's learn about Docker first. So after that, it has excuse me. So it has Docker image, and then what happened, and it has Docker container. Now what this actually is, so Docker file, you can say, it's basically instructions. It's instructions to build the Docker image. Right. Just a second, I'll quickly write it over here. Uh, Instructions to build Docker image. So Docker file is actually instructions to build Docker image. What Docker image is actually? Docker image is a blueprint, or you can say a recipe to a recipe for what? A recipe for the Docker containers. And what Docker containers is? It's running. It's basically a running instance of a running instance of Docker image. Right. So Docker file, which is instructions to build Docker image. Docker image is nothing but the blueprint or a recipe for this container, and container is nothing but the running instance of a Docker image. Consider it as a class and the object. So if you have, or if you know OOPS concept, you know the classes and objects, right? What classes is? Classes is a blueprint for object, right? Classes has all the methods, instructions, how it needs to be done and performed. Then we create the object of that class, and we use its method and perform the tasks that it's intended for, right? Same as that, Docker image is the blueprint and Docker container is the running instance of that Docker image. Now we know that why we use Docker, right? It creates an isolated environment, right? And it has same environment throughout the development. We cannot change the what you can say, we cannot change the environment. It's the same throughout the development, so that the question, will it run on my device, is solved, right? Now many of you have this question, like, what is the difference between virtual machine and Docker? Are they same? Are they same? And the answer is no. Though the tasks or the concepts that you see in Docker, which sounds exactly same what virtual machine does, it's totally a different thing. So what virtual machine is, or virtual machine, if we compare it with Docker, virtual machine is heavy. It is a full operating system. It has slow startup and it consumes your high RAM. Where the Docker on other side, it is actually lightweight. Then it shared host operating system. Means if you are using Debian, it shares the operating system. Means Docker shares the host's operating system. It is not a full operating system, right? Then it starts in seconds, and it uses low RAM. So basically these are the characteristics and how it's different from the virtual machine. Though it sounds similar, but it's totally different from the virtual machine. Right. Now, as I said that a Docker image is a blueprint for a Docker container, which is the running instance of a Docker image. Then what Docker container actually contains. So it contains your app code. It has your application code, let's say Python backend. It has all the dependencies that are needed for the backend to work, and it has some OS level configs, right, which we will see in further videos, right. So this what Docker container actually contains, right. When the Docker image is created, which is blueprint for the recipe, and when the Docker container is running, which is the running instance of the Docker image, it has all the app code dependencies and OS level configs, right. Now when we have learned about theory about Docker, what it actually does, right. If we summarized it quickly, so it creates an isolated environment called container. It solves the problem that whether it will run on my machine, right. These are the Docker terms that you should know, that is Docker file, Docker image, Docker container, right. And also there is a one thing that is known as this, which is Docker Hub. Now what a Docker Hub actually is, if you know GitHub, what GitHub is, say it's similar to the Docker Hub, or you can say Docker Hub is GitHub for Docker images. So what Docker Hub consists of is, it consists of various Docker images. So basically, let's say just a second, yeah, yeah. So let's say these are various images, and this Docker Hub stores these images, like how GitHub stores our projects in high level way. Similar to that, Docker Hub consists of images known as Docker images. You can the images like this is stored inside the Docker Hub. So we'll talk about Docker Hub when we will basically use it, right. So just keep this in mind that Docker Hub is similar to the GitHub. Docker Hub consists of, or it has, or it stores Docker images, right. So now when we have seen the theory about the Docker, why it's used, now let's do one thing, and that is, let's install Docker in our system, right. So let's install Docker in our system. So for that, what you will need to do is that, let's first open our terminal. So as I am using Debian, I'll basically use this. I'll basically tell you the steps for Linux, right. So first you need to simply check whether Docker is available in my or in your PC, If not, then let's install Docker in Linux, right? So first step is let's check, let's sudo apt update. I'll quickly so yeah, the updation is completed. Now let's install Docker in our device. So let's first do sudo apt install. Let's have this command. Docker .io on the pi flag. So it's installing. Here you can see it's installing the docker.io. It's installing its dependencies, some packages. It's installing 21 packages, and this is its downloading size or download size. And this is the command, which is sudo apt install docker.io and the pi. So basically this is the flag that says yes, install all the dependencies that it's providing. So yes, they have installed the Docker. Now let's check the version of it. Now previously we were getting error that Docker was not installed or no command found, but when we run this command, which is Docker version, here is the version you can see, which is 26.1.5, right? After that, what we'll need to do is that we need to start the Docker. So I'll just simply clear this and let's start the Docker. Now I'll write a command that is sudo system ctl start Docker, and yes, the Docker is running. Now this Docker is running in background processes, which is known as Docker daemon. The daemons are basically the background processes that are of course running in your background, which usually takes or consumes less RAM of your computer or your PC, right? So this Docker is running in as a background process. Now let's enable the Docker. The Docker is enabled. Now if you want to stop the Docker, you can simply change this start with stop, but usually there is no need to stop the Docker, as it's a normal daemon which is running as your background, as a background process, and as it consumes less memory, so there's no need to stop the Docker, right? So when we have enabled the Docker, now let's verify. Let's run Docker run hello world. Here you can see that Docker permission denied while trying to connect the Docker daemon socket at this path. So if you don't want to use a Docker with the help of sudo, let's add the Docker. So let's add Docker inside our user mod or user groups, right? So the command for it is, first I'll clear it. Let's say sudo user mod ag, which is add group Docker as the user. the new group which is Docker. Now when I run Docker, run hello world, when we'll run this, that is Docker run hello world, it says unable to find image hello world latest locally, which means that we don't have image of hello world locally in our uh, device. So what it is doing, it's pulling this image which is hello world image from the Docker hub, it's installing it, and it's showing us the message which is hello from Docker. This message shows that your installation appears to be working correctly, right? So even if we don't have this image which is hello world is nothing but this is the image. This image consists of this message, right? So when it didn't found the image, what it did, it pulled the image from the Docker hub and it run that image, and it's showing us this message, which is when we run this Docker run hello world, this is the output we'll get, right? So yeah, this was it for the video, as we have learned about Docker, why we actually use it, why there is need to use Docker, the terms that you should know if you are using Docker, difference between virtual machine and Docker, what Docker hub is, and installing Docker in our system. We have followed the steps, we have installed the Docker, we have run one image. Now in further videos we'll go more deeper in Docker, we'll create our own image and how we can actually use Docker in our project. We'll learn all these things, so stay tuned.